Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
You often hear these stories about people who get greedy. They figure out a little scam and a little more, eventually they go big, they get caught. And you always wonder if they just kept it dialed down a little bit, if they could have gotten away with it. Makes you wonder. So Ben sent me a note, said, Steve, check the story out. And I went straight to the Department of Justice's website and got the press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office out of the Southern District of West Virginia. Two men sentenced to prison for roles in $4.3 million fraud and money laundering scheme. A 46-year-old man from Wayne County and a 69-year-old of North Carolina were sentenced today for their roles in defrauding Toyota of over $4.3 million in connection with the Toyota Customer Support Program. Both men also will be required to pay restitution of the $4.3 million to Toyota. The one man was sentenced to 6 years in prison. A federal jury convicted him in December of 2021 of 3 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of mail fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 2 counts of conspiring to commit money laundering. He was the owner of Big Blue Motor Sales, a Kentucky used car dealership. Evidence at trial revealed that to carry out his scheme, he bought Toyota trucks at wholesale prices at auction, obtained hundreds of copies of Kentucky and West Virginia residents' driver's licenses, fraudulently titled the trucks in the names of those residents, and then fraudulently induced Toyota to repurchase the trucks at 150% of their retail value. Toyota issued 350 checks in the names of the individual false owners between 2013 and 2015. He then forged signatures on all 350 checks and deposited them into his bank account. He then used the money from this fraud scheme to buy more Toyota trucks at wholesale to run through the scheme. He also paid cash bribes to the other defendant. Earlier this week, another defendant was sentenced to a year in prison, a year and 3 months, that is. And the first defendant I was telling you about further used the criminally derived money from the fraud scheme to purchase a beach house in South Carolina. Meanwhile, the other defendant, I mentioned at the top, was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for wire fraud. He pleaded guilty to the charge in July 2020. He was employed as a service manager at a Toyota dealership, and he admitted that he participated in the fraud scheme by ensuring that vehicles brought to the Toyota dealership qualified for the Extended Warranty Extension Program. He admitted that he sent false ownership information to Toyota by electronic wire in furtherance of the scheme. He admitted that he received bribes or kickbacks from Big Blue Motor Sales for his participation in the scheme. So here's what's happening. Toyota had a program where certain vehicles, if they got too rusty, they'd get bought back by Toyota. And so the question is whether or not a vehicle qualifies for that. So what they would do, these two guys apparently, is one of them would go buy a vehicle that fell in the right time frame for this program. He would then get the identification of somebody that was unaware of the program, unaware of the whole scheme, and title it to them, then take it to the dealership, the Toyota dealership, and there a guy would go, oh, this qualifies for the program, and then would vouch for it to Toyota, who would then issue a check to this guy over here, but in the name of somebody else. And he would then pocket the money. So there's somebody out there who does not know that on paper they owned a truck that just got a big buyback. And the guy at the dealership is authorizing these at the behest of Toyota, but they don't know that he's scamming them, and he's getting a kickback for doing it. United States Attorney Will Thompson made the announcement and commended the investigative work of the United States Postal Inspection Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the West Virginia State Police, and the West Virginia Office of the Insurance Commissioner. United States District Judge Joseph Goodwin imposed the sentences, and Assistant United States Attorneys Steve Lowe and Andrew Tessman handled the prosecution. A copy of this press release is located on the website of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I know already because I'm looking at it right now, and that's where I got it from. They actually have at the bottom of the press release where you can find the press release. But I guess if you heard it and you wanted to go find your own copy, that might be helpful. But I remember a couple different stories about the Toyota program. And I'm not sure if it's the exact same one, but Toyota has actually been pretty good with vehicles that get out of warranty and have severe problems. And one that I know of for a fact, when I had a client contact me about it, was the fact that there was a Toyota truck, and I forgot the name of the Toyota truck that's involved, but a Toyota truck for a couple of years maybe, that had an issue with its frame, and the frames would get too rusty. And apparently there's a program whereby they would either replace the frame or buy the truck back. And I remember doing research on this going, that's so strange that a car company would do that without a legal issue being pressed. But apparently there's enough of them out there to where they made the offer and they made good on it. So if I had to guess, what happens here is there's a surprisingly large number of these trucks popping up in one particular area of the country, all supposedly being processed by one dealership. And it makes you wonder, what are the odds that all of these bad vehicles are in this part of the country and all going through this one dealership right here? All being signed off on by this one guy. And again, $4.3 million worth of checks to 350 people. And again, I'm not saying I condone this behavior, but I'm just wondering if the guy had done it 5 or 10 times, might not have gotten caught. But then again, once you do it 10 times, you go, another 10 wouldn't get caught, would I? Okay. Got away with it 20 times. How do we make that an even 50 or an even 100? And one of the bigger problems you also have is there's 3 different people involved here, 2 of whom are mentioned with their sentences and so on here, and another one who I guess is a tangential guy. I don't know if he got handled separately, or the other guy was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in prison, but that was apparently already happened. So in this particular case, it's the 2 guys, and they got busted, and it's 350 people. And think about the weird angle there, because if you're going to do this scam, how do you process the checks? And so to get the names and addresses of people out there and say that, oh yeah, this person bought this truck and then brought it in over here, how do you get those checks sent to you again? Because if you're using a real person's name, don't you have to use their address to send the check to? Because that's one of the ways that this might not fall apart there, in terms of that might not be what tripped them up, but it would certainly be the way you'd catch them, meaning that you could prove this case. So Toyota is cutting 350 checks that are going to different people supposedly, but somehow are actually all going to one guy. How is he rounding those checks up? Because they were using the real names of 350 people, but they could not use the real addresses. Otherwise, the checks would go to these people and they go, hey, I got a check in the mail. So I suspect they used real names and fake addresses. And so there'd be a problem. And one thing that I've learned simply from all my time in practicing law, especially with the car companies, but it's probably true of most big corporations, is big corporations are often handling so much business that little stuff will go under the radar and they'll miss it. So if they'd been ripped off once or twice, might not have caught it. But what happens is, periodically, a best business practice is to pull an audit once in a while of your business. So you've got a program somewhere that's buying back vehicles, and it's cutting checks that add up to $4.3 million someplace down there in Carolina or West Virginia or something. And you do an audit once in a while. You have somebody go in once in a while and just say, we're going to take 10 transactions and double check them. So we issued a check to this person over here for this truck here. So let's run a title search in this truck to see what his history was. And let's call up this customer and see if they're happy with how they got handled. And you call that customer up and they go, what are you talking about? I've never owned a Toyota. Huh? I was supposed to get a check? I never got a check. Oh, we got a check here. It's got your signature on it. It was deposited in this bank. No, I don't bank at that bank. Interesting. Now, we start looking at some other transactions nearby. Start double checking. Turns out a bunch of people didn't get checks. but all the checks are being cashed at some bank over here or something. And pretty soon they'd figure out what happened. And so a lot of times what happens, I mentioned earlier that you pull a little scam, you get away with it. A little more, a little bigger, a little bigger. And what often happens is these people think that no attention's been drawn to them because they haven't heard anything yet. When in reality, the big lumbering corporation has assigned somebody who's digging into it, who's looking at it, going, I found something strange here. And so while they're looking, the scheme is getting bigger. And that often is what happens. So this is a crazy story, but it has to do with the Toyota buyback program involving, I believe, rusty trucks. But there's not a whole lot here about the program. But I remember talking to customers and clients about it back in the day. So Ben, thanks for sending it. From the Department of Justice's own website, their press release, 2 men sentenced to prison for roles in a $4.3 million fraud and money laundering scheme involving Toyota. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I don't even have a plow.